Carl Jung taught us that the path to emotional healing begins the moment we dare to put ourselves first. In a world that constantly pushes us to look outward, for validation from others, and to fit into molds that aren't ours, we rarely pause to ask ourselves, what do I truly want? What do I need to feel whole? The answers to these questions aren't found in other people's opinions or external approval, but in a deep connection with our own inner self. When you decide to prioritize yourself, it's not selfish. It actually means you're finally paying attention to the most important person in your life, you. Jung warns us that many of our emotional wounds come from living disconnected from our true essence. We spend years shaping ourselves to meet the expectations of society, family, or partners, so much so that we forget who we really are. But here's the key. Everything we suppress, everything we deny about ourselves, doesn't just disappear. It transforms into a shadow that will sooner or later find a way to show up in our lives. Maybe you've already noticed this cycle in relationships that seem to repeat themselves endlessly, in patterns of self-sabotage, or in a constant feeling of dissatisfaction. We ask ourselves, why doesn't life change? Why am I stuck in the same conflicts? Without realizing it, the answer isn't out there. It's inside us. Jung teaches that healing starts when we stop searching outward and instead bravely explore our inner world. Think of your life as a mirror reflecting your inner state. If you keep surrounding yourself with people who don't value you, if your energy feels drained by toxic relationships or unfulfilling situations, it's no coincidence. Your unconscious is signaling that something inside you needs care. The real question is, are you willing to listen? Most people avoid this process because facing it isn't easy. It means confronting our wounds, our insecurities, and accepting that sometimes we are the ones who allow pain to linger. But this is exactly where true transformation happens. When you put yourself first, you realize you can't heal by staying close to what hurts you. Emotional healing doesn't happen in toxic environments. It doesn't occur when you keep allowing the same things to happen. Jung spoke about the importance of individuation, a process where we break free from external influences to discover our own identity. This doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world. It means stopping depending on it to define who you are. How many times have you felt your happiness depends on someone else's approval? How many times has the fear of rejection stopped you from doing what you really want? When you start prioritizing yourself, something inside you shifts. You stop settling for emotional crumbs. You stop expecting others to fill the voids only you can heal. You realize you don't have to fit into anyone else's mold because what you really need is to connect with yourself. And when that connection happens, healing flows freely. The relationships that used to drain you begin to fade. The situations that caused you pain lose their power, not because the world changed, but because you changed. You stopped searching outside for what was always inside you. And this is where true freedom begins, when you understand your well-being depends on no one but you. But this process doesn't happen overnight. It requires courage, patience, learning to say no, setting boundaries, and above all, learning to listen to yourself. How many times have you ignored your intuition for fear of disappointing others? How many times have you sacrificed your peace to please someone else? Jung tells us the price we pay for ignoring ourselves is too high. We pay with anxiety, dissatisfaction, and a life that doesn't feel like ours. When you choose to put yourself first, something curious happens. The world doesn't seem so chaotic anymore. Relationships stop feeling like a constant battle. Why? Because you stopped fighting against yourself. Emotional healing isn't a destination, it's a daily journey. It's the act of choosing yourself again and again, without guilt or fear. And when you finally do this, everything changes, not because the world changed, but because you see it through new eyes. The peace you sought outside was always inside. You just had to remember you deserve more. You deserve a life where you don't need permission to be who you are. This is just the beginning. Real transformation happens when you take the first step, when you let go of what no longer fits and allow yourself to discover who you really are. It's not easy, but it's the only path to an authentic, full life. The question is, are you ready to walk it? When you start prioritizing yourself, you begin to notice things that once went unnoticed. Suddenly, you see that some relationships only worked because you were the one putting in all the effort. You realize there were situations where you gave more than you received and endured the unbearable just out of fear of being alone. But when you decide to choose yourself, something inside you breaks open. It's a necessary rupture, a crack through which the light of awareness finally enters. Jung taught us that everything we suppress will find a way to show up in our lives. If we don't listen to our needs, we end up projecting them onto others. If we refuse to recognize our value, we attract people who reinforce that belief. If we avoid facing our wounds, the world will reflect them back to us repeatedly until we decide to face them. Many avoid this process because it's uncomfortable. It means accepting that what we called love often wasn't love at all, but attachment. That what we thought was friendship was sometimes just convenience. And that most of our decisions were driven by fear of not being enough. But here's the key. When you prioritize yourself, you stop settling. You stop negotiating your peace. You stop holding up the unsustainable. And then something scary happens. You begin to lose people. Not because you've changed, but because you no longer tolerate what you once accepted. People who seemed essential start to drift away, some without explanation. But what at first feels like loss soon becomes liberation. Because for every door that closes, a space opens for something more authentic. This process, though necessary, isn't easy. The unconscious resists change because it seeks the security of the familiar. Even if the past was painful, it's still familiar. Familiarity gives a false sense of control. That's why many choose to stay in painful situations, in draining relationships. Because the fear of the unknown seems greater than the pain they already know. But this is exactly where true transformation happens, when you dare to let go. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting overnight or pretending nothing matters. It means accepting that you can't force anyone to stay, can't make someone value you if they don't want to, and that the only person responsible for your well-being is you. At this point, the world splits into two kinds of people: those who keep searching outside for what they can only find within, and those who decide to face themselves and start their own healing journey. Jung says the path to wholeness isn't easy, but it's the only path worth taking. It's the path of authenticity, where you allow yourself to be who you really are, without excuses, without fear. When you decide to put yourself first, you notice something powerful. The quality of your relationships changes. People who were in your life only out of convenience start to drift away, and in their place come those who truly value your presence. Relationships based on mutual respect and support, not sacrifice. Because when you value yourself, you stop accepting less than you deserve. The problem is, most people never reach this point because letting go is painful, not just because of the loss itself, but because it forces us to face the part of ourselves that allowed those dynamics for so long. It's easier to blame others, to say the problem is outside, but Jung reminds us that everything we experience reflects our inner world. Until we do the work to heal inside, we'll keep repeating the same patterns. This is where the concept of the shadow comes in. Jung said we all carry parts inside us we don't want to admit. Fears, insecurities, hidden desires, emotions we suppress because we were told they're unacceptable. But denying our shadow doesn't make it disappear. In fact, the more we ignore it, the more power it has over us. The shadow doesn't vanish just because you avoid it. It hides in the relationships you choose, in the conflicts you face, in the emotions you can't control. When you put yourself first, you start making your shadow conscious. You begin to notice your own patterns, how you self-sabotage, the times you say yes when you want to say no. At that moment, you have two choices: keep living unconsciously or start taking control of your life. This is where many stop, because facing the shadow is uncomfortable. It means admitting that we allowed situations that hurt us, gave too much where we weren't valued, accepted less than we deserved. But here's the truth. The pain of facing reality is temporary. The pain of living in denial lasts a lifetime. The path to emotional healing starts when you decide to look at yourself honestly, not with judgment, but with compassion. Jung said we can't heal what we don't recognize. We can't change what we refuse to accept. But the moment you face yourself head-on, without masks or excuses, something inside you shifts. This is where true healing begins. When you stop blaming others and start owning your power. When you realize life doesn't just happen to you, it's created by every choice you make. When you understand you don't need anyone's approval to live an authentic life. From that point, transformation becomes inevitable. You start attracting people and situations that reflect your new level of awareness. You stop struggling to fit where you never belonged. Anxiety about the future dissolves because you trust your ability to navigate life through your own truth. But the most beautiful part of all is the peace that arises when you finally choose yourself. That sense of freedom you feel when you no longer depend on anything external to feel complete. That certainty that everything you need was inside you all along. The question is, are you willing to go through this process? Are you ready to let go of what weighs you down and open yourself up to the possibility of something better? It won't be easy, but I promise it will be worth it. Because when you put yourself first, emotional healing flows without barriers, and the world stops feeling like a hostile place and instead becomes a reflection of your own well-being. When you start prioritizing yourself, something inevitable happens. You change. And when you change, people around you react. Some celebrate, some question, and some will try to make you feel guilty for not being the same person they once knew. This is one of the hardest moments in the process because you realize not everyone is ready to accept your transformation. This is where many retreat, return to old habits, go back to unfulfilling relationships, accept conditions that diminish them, all out of fear of losing what's familiar. But here's the truth. If you have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's life, that place was never meant for you. Jung teaches us that individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are, isn't a path everyone will understand. But it doesn't matter if others get it or not. What matters is whether you are willing to keep going, even if it means walking alone for a while. The fear of loneliness is one of the biggest traps in personal growth. We've been taught to believe that being alone means being incomplete, rejected, or a failure. But the truth is, loneliness isn't the problem. The real problem is not knowing how to be with yourself. Jung said the journey to wholeness requires a deep period of introspection, where we stop searching outside for what can only be found within. And when we learn to be truly comfortable in our own company, we stop settling for just anything simply to avoid the discomfort of silence. At this stage, many people experience what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a transitional period when everything old falls apart, but the new hasn't yet arrived. It's a void, a feeling of uncertainty where everything you once believed was safe begins to crumble. This is where most people give up because the mind demands quick answers, wants certainty, wants to grab onto something solid. But growth doesn't work that way. Real transformation happens when you allow yourself to stay in that emptiness without rushing to fill it with the same old things. When you resist the temptation to return to the familiar just because it's comfortable. When instead of distracting yourself, you choose to face what you truly feel. This is the moment many realize that much of their identity was built around others, that their value depended on being needed, accepted, or recognized. And when all those external expectations disappear, a profound question emerges. Who am I when no one is watching? Jung's answer to this question lies in integrating our whole being. Not just the parts we show the world, but also our shadows, our wounds, and our deepest truths. When you stop running from yourself and dare to look at your life honestly, something shifts. The need to please fades away. The urgency to fit in dissolves. And for the first time, you start to feel free. At this point, the world will test you. Past situations will return to see if you've truly learned the lesson. Relationships you thought were over will knock on your door again. People who once manipulated you will try to do so again. And this is when you'll know if you really changed. Not because the world looks different, but because your response changes. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself or convince anyone of your worth. You understand that not every connection is meant to last, and losing some people isn't a tragedy, but a realignment. The energy you once spent trying to be enough for others, you now invest in yourself. Although at first this might feel strange, it is the greatest act of self-love you can perform. When you put yourself first, you start noticing patterns you previously ignored. You realize life isn't just a series of random events, but a mirror reflecting your own consciousness. Everything you see outside reflects what you carry inside. Jung spoke about the principle of projection. What irritates or attracts us in others is often a reflection of parts of ourselves we haven't fully accepted. If you constantly attract relationships where you feel undervalued or end up in situations where you must overexert yourself, ask, which part of me still believes I'm not enough? Because the answer isn't out there. It lies in your relationship with yourself. When you do this inner work, something incredible happens. Life stops feeling like a battle. Anxiety about the future melts away because you trust your ability to face any situation with your truth. Relationships cease being sources of conflict and become spaces for mutual growth. And most importantly, you reclaim your power. This doesn't mean everything will be perfect or that you'll never feel fear or insecurity again. It means you now have the tools not to let those feelings control you. Instead of acting from scarcity, you act from abundance. Instead of desperately seeking love, you recognize love has always been within you. Jung taught us life isn't about eliminating pain, but learning to integrate it. That true healing comes from embracing our wounds and giving them new meaning. When you allow yourself to do this, you stop living in the past and stop worrying about the future. You begin to experience the only reality that truly matters, the present. Here, peace is found, not in the absence of problems, but in the certainty that no matter what happens, you have the strength to hold yourself up. Not relying on anyone's approval, but trusting that at the end of the day, you are enough just as you are. This is the gift of putting yourself first. You not only reclaim your energy, your time, and your peace, but something even more precious, your authenticity. Because when you decide to stop being what the world expects and start being who you truly are, emotional healing flows without barriers. And life finally becomes a reflection of your own truth. When you make that choice, you see clearly that much of your suffering didn't come from the outside world, but from the stories you told yourself. Stories that made you believe you had to try harder to be loved, to adapt to be accepted, to constantly prove your worth. But as soon as you start questioning those beliefs, the truth becomes clear. It was never your responsibility to carry what doesn't belong to you. Jung taught us that the collective unconscious is filled with inherited patterns and beliefs we rarely question. Ideas about love, success, happiness, loyalty, sacrifice that shape us from childhood. Without realizing it, we end up repeating stories that aren't even ours. Awakening begins when you start asking, why do I believe what I believe? Why do I keep sustaining harmful dynamics? Why do I tolerate the intolerable? This questioning is uncomfortable because it forces us to see that many of our choices weren't really ours, but what we were taught to accept as normal. Maybe you grew up watching your parents sacrifice themselves for others without receiving anything in return, and now you believe love means giving everything even at the cost of your peace. Maybe you were told that if you weren't productive, you had no value, and now you feel guilty whenever you allow yourself to rest, or maybe you learned that being strong means enduring, which is why letting go is so hard, even when something no longer makes sense. But here's the truth. You can unlearn everything that limited you. You can choose new paths, new beliefs, new ways of relating to yourself and others that you're not condemned to repeat the same stories forever. Jung said destiny isn't fixed. It's the result of what we do with our consciousness. And when you decide to expand your awareness, your reality shifts. When you put yourself first, you realize love doesn't have to be a battle, peace isn't an unreachable goal, and happiness doesn't depend on external factors. You don't need to prove your worth because simply existing is enough. And this is where true transformation begins. The people who once held power over you lose control. The situations that used to weigh you down stop having the same impact. Not because the world changed, but because you changed the way you relate to it. You stop trying to be understood by those who never tried to understand you. You stop struggling to fit where you were never truly welcomed. You stop trying to save what's clearly meant to stay in the past. This is freedom. Not the false freedom of doing whatever you want without consequences, but the inner freedom of knowing you don't need anything outside yourself to feel complete. The confidence to be alone without feeling empty. The certainty that no matter what happens, you'll always be okay because you've finally learned to be with yourself. Jung said individuation is the most important process of our existence. It's the path toward integration, toward wholeness. And although this path often involves pain, loss, and solitude, it's the only one that can lead us to a meaningful life. When you start prioritizing yourself, when you leave behind the old versions of yourself that only existed to please others, life rewards you in unexpected ways. New people enter your life. Opportunities you once thought impossible begin to manifest. And above all, you experience a peace you've never felt before because you stopped fighting against yourself. You stopped searching outside for what was always inside. And it's at this point that many feel they've finally awakened. That life isn't about surviving or pleasing anymore, but about experiencing, creating, feeling, and living from a place of authenticity instead of fear. But the work doesn't end here. Consciousness is like a muscle that must be exercised constantly because society, family, and environment will keep trying to pull you back into old patterns. They will keep trying to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel selfish for choosing yourself. But the difference now is that you know the truth. There is nothing more valuable than your peace, nothing more important than your well-being. At the end of the day, the only decisions that truly matter are the ones that bring you closer to yourself. The world changes when you change. Your relationships improve when your relationship with yourself improves. Opportunities arrive when you stop acting from lack and start acting from fullness. Jung tells us the unconscious responds to our deepest beliefs, and when you truly believe you deserve better, the universe steps in to show you that. So the question is, are you ready to see it? Ready to let go of everything that no longer resonates with you and open yourself to the possibility of something completely new? It won't be easy, but I promise it will be worth it, because when you finally decide to put yourself first, emotional healing flows without barriers, and your life becomes what it was always meant to be, a reflection of your own truth. When you begin living authentically, something curious happens. The things that once confused you become clear. The relationships that drained you now feel unbearable. The situations you tolerated without question suddenly feel heavy. This isn't a coincidence, it's growth. It's a sign you're evolving, that you can no longer ignore what your soul has been trying to tell you for so long. Jung taught us that consciousness isn't static. It expands as we dare to look within. And when that happens, the world can no longer stay the same because what you see outside is only a reflection of what you carry inside. If inside you there is clarity, outside you'll find clarity. If inside you there is chaos, that's what you'll see in the world around you. That's why. When you put yourself first, you start attracting experiences that match your new energy. You no longer need to force connections, beg for love, or prove to anyone that you deserve respect. Everything flows naturally because you're no longer operating from lack, but from abundance. This change doesn't happen overnight. There will be moments of doubt, when the temptation to return to old ways is strong, and when loneliness feels too heavy. But here lies the true test. Will you betray yourself out of fear of being alone, or will you hold on to your authenticity until what truly belongs to you arrives? The unconscious always tests us, not because the universe wants to punish us, but because we need to prove to our own minds that we're ready for the next level. That's why. Just as you start prioritizing yourself, it's possible that people from your past will reappear, trying to pull you back into old patterns. It's possible life will place you in situations that once cost you dearly, not because you're regressing, but because you need to reaffirm that this time you'll choose differently. When you pass this test and decide not to return to what hurt you, something incredible happens. Your energy changes completely, that you're no longer anchored in fear. You're no longer chained to the need for approval. You're no longer waiting for others to validate your path. And when this happens, the world responds in unexpected ways. Opportunities begin to arise effortlessly. People enter your life with a different intention, one based on respect, admiration, and authenticity. Everything that once seemed out of reach starts to manifest, not because the world changed, but because now you believe you deserve it. This is where many feel they've finally awakened, that all the suffering they endured had a purpose, to bring them to this point. And although pain is never easy, when you look back you realize that every fall, every loss, every rejection was actually a disguise. Liberation. Jung reminds us that the unconscious never forgets but can heal. The wounds of the past don't disappear, but we can change how we relate to them. They stop being chains that bind us and become reminders of how far we've come. And when you stop seeing your story as a series of failures and start seeing it as a path of growth, everything changes. The problem is, most people never get to this point. They stay stuck in resentment, nostalgia, guilt, looking back, wishing things were different. But true power isn't in what could have been. It's in what you can build from now on. When you put yourself first, you stop living in the past. You no longer need to justify what happened or mourn what you lost. You simply accept that everything happened as it should have, and that every experience prepared you to be who you are today. And here is where life becomes truly fascinating. When you free yourself from the weight of what was, you realize that the future is entirely in your hands. There is no fixed destiny you are condemned to, but infinite possibilities waiting to be explored. The only question left is, what will you do with this new freedom? Will you keep repeating old stories, or will you dare to write something completely new? Most people choose safety. They prefer to stay in the familiar, even if it means giving up happiness. But those who truly dare to put themselves first, who decide to live from their authenticity without fear of consequences, discover that life has so much more to offer than they ever imagined. Because when you choose yourself, the world chooses you back. When you value yourself, life responds by giving you more reasons to do so. When you decide to let go of what no longer serves you, what's truly meant for you finds its way to you. That it's not magic, not luck. It's the natural law of energy, that it's the reflection of your own growth. It's the inevitable result of making the most important decision of all, the decision to be true to yourself. When you finally decide to prioritize yourself, life takes a completely different path. You no longer cling to what hurts you. You no longer try to convince anyone to value you. You no longer live in the uncertainty of whether you're enough. Because deep down, you know you are. You don't need to seek outside what has always been inside you. But that doesn't mean the path will always be easy. There will be days when you doubt, when the wounds of the past try to speak louder than your new awareness. Moments when you feel tempted to return to the old just because it's familiar. But the difference now is that you know the truth. Your peace is priceless. Your well-being is non-negotiable. Your worth doesn't depend on anyone's opinion. And that changes everything. Jung taught us that life's purpose is not superficial happiness but fullness. And fullness is only reached when we dare to be who we truly are, without masks, without fear, without waiting for validation. That it's about living from authenticity, embracing our light and shadows, accepting that every experience, no matter how difficult, was part of our evolution. When you reach this point, you no longer seek approval but connection. You no longer want to fit in but to belong somewhere you can be yourself. And this is where true magic happens. Because when you live from your truth, you attract the people and opportunities truly aligned with you. So this message doesn't end here. If this reflection resonated with you, if at any moment you felt these words spoke directly to your soul, it's because this knowledge isn't just for you. There are many others out there who also need to hear this. Those trapped in hurtful dynamics, those still searching outside what they can only find within themselves. This is the moment to share this message with the world. That if you've ever felt alone in this process, remember, thousands are going through the same. Every word you share could be the light someone needs to awaken. Leave your comment below and tell me which part of this message touched something inside you. Tell me what you're willing to change, which relationships or habits you've decided to let go of, or simply how you feel after hearing this. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and hit the notification bell so this message keeps reaching more people. Every time you engage with this content, you're not only helping spread it, but becoming part of a movement of transformation and awareness. Because the world needs more people living from their authenticity, more people daring to be themselves without fear, choosing peace over chaos, and choosing to put themselves first without guilt. If this message reached you, it means you're ready to take the next step. Share this content, leave your comment, subscribe, and always remember this. When you prioritize yourself, emotional healing flows without barriers, and your life becomes a reflection of your own truth. See you in the next video. And until then, keep choosing yourself again and again. If this message touched your heart and opened your eyes, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can build a community of people committed to healing, growth, and living authentically. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video that empowers you to put yourself first and transform your life from the inside out. Remember, your journey to true freedom and emotional healing starts the moment you choose you. Let's walk this path together, one step, one choice, one day at a time. Share, subscribe, and keep choosing yourself. Your best life awaits.